The studio was called Stage 4. It sat on the eastern lot of a television production facility in Burbank, California, on a Thursday afternoon in the spring of 1979. The overhead fluorescents had been replaced with broadcast lighting, and the heat from those lights was considerable. There were 214 people in the audience that day. They had been seated in tiered rows that curved around a central conversation pit, and most of them had arrived believing they were there to watch a daytime talk program. They had not come to witness anything permanent. They had come because the tickets were free, and the afternoon was open. The guest at the center of the conversation pit that afternoon was a man named Roland Varga. He was 29 years old. He stood 6 feet 2 inches and carried 218 pounds across a frame that had been built by 11 years of competitive karate and 3 years of professional kickboxing. His record across both disciplines was 43 wins and 4 losses. 2 of those losses had been overturned on appeal. The karate community in Southern California knew his name the way you know the name of weather. He was ranked 4th in the United States in full contact karate at the time. 4th, not 5th, not 6th. He had a face that television liked. And the producers of the program had noticed that, and so they had invited him to speak about the martial arts and about what he called the slow erosion of the craft by what he further called the entertainment machine. Roland Varga had prepared remarks. He had written them on index cards, which he did not use. Somewhere in the 4th row of that studio audience, wearing a gray cotton jacket over a white undershirt, sitting with his hands folded on his knees, was a man that nobody in the building recognized. He was 39 years old. He appeared, at a glance, to be unremarkable. He wore no jewelry. His boots were worn at the heel. He had come to the taping because a friend had given him 2 tickets, and the other ticket had gone unused, and so he sat alone in the 4th row with 213 strangers and watched the man at the center of the conversation pit begin to speak. In the next 19 seconds, Roland Varga would say something in front of 214 witnesses, 2 cameras, and a live microphone that he would spend the next 4 decades of his life attempting to explain. Nobody in that studio knew they were about to watch something that would be repeated in dojos and in green rooms and in the back seats of cars at stoplights for the rest of their lives. Roland Varga had a gift for performance. This was not in dispute. The producers had discovered him at a regional tournament in Anaheim 8 months prior, where he had defeated 3 opponents in a single afternoon with a technical precision that one judge described afterward as surgical. He did not showboat. He did not preen. He simply arrived at the correct angle before his opponent had finished deciding on a wrong one, and the matter was concluded. His technique in the low kick was particularly noted. He had developed a variation that shortened the chamber by 4 inches and accelerated the delivery accordingly, and in 11 years of competition, only one man had successfully defended against it more than once. The program that afternoon was called Open Forum, and it ran on a regional off-channel with an audience of roughly 340,000 households. The topic, as listed in the production notes, was the state of American martial arts. Varga had agreed to appear as the primary guest. He had been promised 12 minutes of airtime. He took 14. The host, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had been in broadcasting for 19 years, and who was known in the industry for his ability to manage difficult guests, later said that he had sensed within the first 90 seconds that the interview was not going to proceed in the direction anyone had planned. Varga had arrived with an agenda that the index cards had not fully captured. He was not there to discuss technique or history. He was there to make a point, and the point had a target. He began professionally enough. He spoke about the origins of karate in Okinawa. He spoke about the discipline of daily practice. He spoke about the obligation of the serious practitioner to protect the integrity of the art against what he called dilution. Gerald Fitch nodded and asked reasonable questions. The audience was attentive. The lights were warm. The 2 cameras moved on their tracks with the slow confidence of broadcast machinery that had done this many times before. Then Varga set down his water glass and leaned forward. He said that the problem with American martial arts in 1979 was not the students. The problem, he said, was the images. The images that were being sold to the public through film and television as representations of what the martial arts actually were. He named no names in the first 2 minutes of this argument. He was careful. He built his case like a man who had been building it for some time and had learned the correct order of the stones. Then Gerald Fitch, in what he would later describe as an instinct toward good television, asked him to be specific. Varga was specific. He said that the most damaging force in American martial arts at that moment was the phenomenon of the martial arts actor, the man who had studied enough to look correct on film but had never been tested in competition, the man who moved beautifully in choreographed sequences against opponents who were paid to fall, the man who was, in Varga's precise formulation, a technician of the mirror. He named Chuck Norris. He said the name clearly and without hesitation into a live microphone in front of 214 people and 2 cameras. He said that Chuck Norris was a capable athlete and a serviceable entertainer, but that he was above all an actor. He said the word actor with the deliberateness of a man placing a stone on a scale. He said that Norris had not competed at the elite level since the early 1970s, and that the image being sold in his films bore no relationship to the realities of full contact competition. He said, and these were his exact words, that any serious champion in 1979 would take Chuck Norris apart in under 3 minutes, and that the public deserved to know the difference between a performer and a practitioner. He sat back. Gerald Fitch looked at his notes. The studio went to a quality of quiet that broadcast studios very rarely achieve. In the 4th row, the man in the gray cotton jacket unfolded his hands from his knees. If you want to find out what happened in the next 47 seconds, make sure you are subscribed, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. This community stretches further than you know, and we read every one. He did not stand immediately. That was the first thing the witnesses would remember when they described it later. He did not stand the way a man stands when he is angry. He stood the way a man stands when something that has been resting is no longer resting. There was no urgency in it. There was no theater. He simply unfolded himself from the 4th row seat, at a pace that suggested he had all the time available to him in the world. He was wearing the gray jacket and the white undershirt and the worn boots, and he had a cap on his head that he removed now and folded once along the bill and set on the empty seat beside him with a deliberateness that the woman sitting in the row behind him would later say she could not explain except to describe it as final. He walked to the aisle. He walked down the aisle toward the conversation pit. He did not hurry. The 2 cameras tracked him, because cameras track motion and because the floor director, a 24-year-old named Patricia Wells who had been in the industry for less than 2 years, made a decision in that moment that she would later credit as the best of her professional life. He stopped at the edge of the conversation pit railing, 4 feet from where Roland Varga was seated. He did not vault the railing. He did not shout across it. He stood at the railing and he waited. And the waiting was the loudest thing that had happened in that studio all afternoon. Gerald Fitch said later that it was approximately 8 seconds between the moment the man reached the railing and the moment the audience understood who he was. 8 seconds. He said it moved through the room row by row, from the front toward the back, like something passing through water. The woman in the 3rd row turned to say something to the woman beside her, and then stopped turning. The man in the 2nd row, a retired electrician from Glendale named Howard Pratt, who had come because his daughter had won the tickets in a radio contest, said afterward that he simply heard the name move through the room, in a whisper that went from his left to his right, without any single person seeming to start it. Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris. He did not acknowledge the recognition. He did not smile. He did not nod at the audience or the cameras. He looked at Roland Varga. He said 4 words. He said, "I heard you clearly." Roland Varga at this moment was 29 years old and ranked 4th in the United States in full contact karate. He had 43 wins. He had defeated 3 men in a single afternoon in Anaheim 8 months prior, with a technique that a tournament judge had called surgical. He was not a man who frightened easily, and he would tell people that himself for many years afterward. But the witnesses in the front 2 rows of that studio audience would consistently report, in the years that followed, that something happened in Roland Varga's face during those 4 words that was difficult to describe with precision. Patricia Wells, the floor director, described it as the face of a man who had been speaking in an empty room and had just discovered it was not empty. Varga stood. He gestured toward the conversation pit with the openness of a man who was still, at this point, choosing confidence over calculation. He said, "Come down, let's talk about it." Chuck Norris came down. He came down without removing his eyes from Vargas and without adjusting his pace by a single increment, and when he reached the center of the conversation pit he stopped at a distance of 11 feet, not 9 feet, not 13 feet, 11 feet. This number would matter shortly. A fight is not two men moving toward each other. A fight is a conversation about space, and the opening statement of that conversation is where you choose to stand. 11 feet is outside the effective range of every technique Roland Varga had built his career on. His low kick required 9 feet. His combination sequence, the one that had ended 7 of his last 12 competitive bouts, required 8.5. The man standing 11 feet away from him had arrived at a distance that was entirely safe for one of them and not the other, and he had arrived there without appearing to think about it. Varga moved forward. It was not a lunge, it was a controlled step, the kind a trained competitor uses to establish range. It was technically sound. It was exactly the kind of movement that had worked 43 times in a career built on footwork and timing. Chuck Norris moved back, not away. Back. There is a distinction that took the witnesses in that room a moment to understand. He moved back at the same tempo Varga moved forward, maintaining the 11 feet with an ease that suggested the distance required no effort to keep. Varga moved forward again, this time with more commitment. Chuck Norris moved back again, and this time he also moved 45 degrees to his left, and Varga's momentum carried him 2 steps past the center line before he could correct. Second one of the confrontation proper ended there. The tournament director from the Anaheim event, a man named Dennis Cho, who happened to be in the studio that afternoon because he was acquainted with the producers and had come to observe Varga's television appearance, said later that he knew at the end of second one. He said he had been in the martial arts for 31 years at that point, and that what he had just watched in one exchange of footwork told him everything that was going to happen. He set his program down on his knee. He did not pick it up again. Varga reset. He was a professional and he knew how to reset. He adjusted his stance. He measured the distance. He identified what he believed to be the correct angle and he committed to it with everything his 11 years of competition had taught him. He threw the low kick. The variation. The one that had been shortened by 4 inches in the chamber. The one that only one man in his competitive career had successfully defended against more than once. Chuck Norris was not there. He had moved before the commitment was complete, which meant he had read the commitment before Varga had finished making it. Which meant he was operating at a level of anticipation that made the technique functionally invisible. He was to Varga's right and slightly behind him, and he was there without any apparent urgency, and he stayed there for 2 full seconds while the low kick found nothing but the air where he had been standing. That was second 2. Second 3 was quiet. Both men were still. The studio was completely silent. Howard Pratt, the retired electrician from Glendale in the second row, said afterward that he was aware during that silence of the sound of the fluorescent lighting from the outer hallway leaking under the studio door. He said you could hear it in the room because there was nothing else. Varga made his 3rd attempt. He was a serious practitioner, and serious practitioners do not stop at 2 failures, and so he went to his combination sequence, the one that had ended 7 of his last 12 bouts, the one that began with a feint to the body and resolved at the jaw. He set it up correctly. He executed the feint correctly. Chuck Norris did not respond to the feint. He did not block the combination. He did not parry the combination. He slipped the combination by a margin of approximately 2 inches at the point of closest approach, moving inside the arc of the final technique, in a way that placed him at a distance of roughly 8 inches from Roland Varga's right ear, and from that position he raised one hand. He did not strike. He raised the hand and held it at a point approximately 1 inch from Varga's right temple, and he held it there. Still, the hand did not tremble. The breathing, by every account, was even. He stayed like that for 3 seconds. Then he lowered the hand. Dennis Cho said that those 3 seconds were the longest 3 seconds he had experienced in 31 years of martial arts. He said he had seen knockouts. He had seen championship finishes. He had seen things on competition floors that were technically superior to what he had just watched, but he had never in 31 years seen a man demonstrate the space between the capacity for harm and the choice not to cause it with such absolute clarity. He said it was not a performance. He said you cannot perform that. He said the only thing you can do when you have arrived at that position with that much precision is make a decision, and the decision Chuck Norris made in that moment was one that took more control than the alternative would have required. Norris stepped back to 11 feet. He looked at Roland Varga. He extended his right hand. Varga did not move immediately. There was a pause of approximately 4 seconds, which the witnesses would describe differently depending on where they were sitting. The people in the front rows described it as consideration. The people in the back rows described it as something closer to arrival, as though Varga were traveling from one place to another and needed the 4 seconds to complete the journey. He took the hand. He shook it. He said one sentence that only Chuck Norris heard. He said it quietly, looking at the floor between them. Norris nodded once. 41 years later, in an interview that was included in a documentary about American martial arts history, Dennis Cho was asked what he believed Roland Varga had said in that moment. He said he had spent 4 decades thinking about it. He said he had arrived at the conclusion that it did not matter precisely what the words were. He said the posture of the man who spoke them told you everything that words needed to tell you. He said the posture was that of a man who had been corrected and knew it and was deciding what to do with the correction. Varga chose. He did not offer an explanation. He did not suggest that the conditions had been unusual, or the floor space insufficient, or the lighting a factor. He said what men of real character say when they have been answered clearly, and what he said was sufficient, and Chuck Norris accepted it without elaboration and turned and walked back up the aisle of the studio, and retrieved the gray cap from the seat beside his empty chair, and put it back on his head and left through the door at the top of the house. He was gone before Gerald Fitch had located his next question. Patricia Wells, the 24-year-old floor director, kept both cameras on him until the door closed. She would work in television for another 38 years, and she would say, at various points in that career, that it was the best single piece of direction she had ever made. Not because of any technical excellence. Because of a decision she made in the moment. She understood that she was watching something that should be recorded completely. And she recorded it completely. And she has never expressed a single doubt about that choice. Dennis Cho drove back to Anaheim that evening and arrived at his dojo at approximately 8:45 p.m. He taught a class the following morning, and at the end of the class, before his students left, he told them what he had seen. He did not embellish it. He did not add to it or subtract from it. He said it as plainly as he knew how to say it, and then he dismissed the class. Within 3 weeks, the story was circulating in 7 states. Within a year, it had accumulated 2 additional witnesses who had not been in the room. One detail about a verbal exchange that had not occurred, and a version in which the confrontation had taken place backstage rather than on the studio floor. Within 5 years, there were people in the martial arts community who described having been present in that studio who had never in their lives been to Burbank. This is what oral history does. It moves through communities the way water moves through soil, carrying some things intact and depositing others in the wrong location. The essential truth of the story did not change. The essential truth was that a man of 39, in worn boots and a gray jacket, sitting alone in the 4th row of a television studio, had been given a reason to stand up. And what had happened when he stood up had told everyone in the room something they did not know how to say in a single sentence, but could not afterwards say they hadn't understood. Roland Varga continued to compete for 4 more years. He retired with a record of 61 wins and 9 losses. He opened a school in San Diego in 1984 that he operated for over 2 decades. He did not speak publicly about the afternoon in Studio 4 for 17 years. When he did speak about it in a martial arts magazine profile in 1996, he said 2 sentences on the subject. He said that he had learned something that afternoon that his competitive record had not taught him. He said that the difference between what you can do and what someone else cannot take from you are different measurements of the same man, and for most of his career he had been measuring only one of them. Chuck Norris, by his own account in a memoir published in 2004, never spoke about the afternoon publicly until the book. In the memoir he described the day in a single paragraph. He said he had heard something said on live television about himself and about his art, and that he had felt obliged to respond, and that the response had been satisfactory, and that he had returned to his car and driven home and had soup for dinner. He said the soup was good. The distance between what a man could do and what he chooses to do is not nothing. It is in fact the whole of the matter. Power without restraint is noise. Power with restraint is argument. Power with restraint and an extended hand afterward is something rarer than either, and it is the thing that gets carried through decades, not in competition records and not in film credits, but in the specific memory of a retired electrician from Glendale who can still, when asked, describe the exact quality of the fluorescent light he heard bleeding under a studio door in the spring of 1979. The man in the gray jacket got in his car. He drove home. The boulevard outside the studio was moving with the ordinary traffic of a Thursday afternoon. The light fell indifferently on the asphalt. A delivery truck turned left. The world did not note what had happened inside that building any more than it notes anything. But 214 people had been in that room. And 214 people knew. Next week we will tell the story of what happened when a former Green Beret walked into a Los Angeles boxing gym in 1971 and told the man working the heavy bag that the military's hand-to-hand program was a superior discipline to anything being taught in civilian dojos. And why the man working the bag sat at swinging and said only, "Show me." Stay subscribed. You will not want to have missed that one.